Welcome to the Fantasy Overwatch Underground. We got a very exciting show for you today, and you are not gonna want to miss. Wait, this thing's got video now? Well, at least you know how I make my fantasy picks then. Welcome to the show in video format, at least for this episode. It is still a very special show, not just because this trash introduction is here, but because I have a guest on the show. It's been a long time since I've had a guest on here, and I'm very excited that Volamel joined for today. As you may know, Volamel is on the Tactical Crouch podcast, which is my personal favorite as far as what I listen to Overwatch content wise. And he's also started a recent YouTube series called 60 Short. Short 60 is 60 Short, where he has 60-second Overwatch clips from Al to teach you a thing or two. So if you haven't subscribed to his content, he is in the show notes. Go hit him up at Volamel on both Twitter and on YouTube, and you won't regret it. If you're over here watching this and my terrible introductions, go check his stuff out for actual quality content. The show will be in a little bit different format, just audio. I hope you enjoy. I really enjoy having people on this show who know Overwatch a little bit better than I do, and Volamel is definitely in that category. So, done with this, let's get to it. Today on the Fantasy Underground, I'm happy to announce the first guest in ages, one Volamel. How you doing today, sir?
Good. Just kind of coming off the big Overwatch 2 news, and getting ready for June Joust. It's a fun time to be an Overwatch fan.
For sure. We had the 5v5 announcement today, which I feel like is the first thing we have to talk about after we talk about what you've been doing lately on YouTube. So, the one of the main reasons I wanted to have you on is because I'm over here gushing. You're one of my favorite content creators. I love you, Vol, and I'm going to try and make you feel as embarrassed as possible while I have you on.
It's working.
no video, so I can't see your face turning red. But
I'm squirming. Don't worry.
Love the stuff that you do. But you've recently started a YouTube series called 60 Shorts, I believe. Tell me a little bit about it.
I try to take a play that I enjoy or thought was really thought-provoking. I attempt to break it down in 60 seconds or less. It usually is like 61 or 2, maybe 3 seconds in total. But it's a big challenge to try and just take a piece of really interesting play from the Overwatch League, or even, I've dabbled with the idea of going into like the historical side of Overwatch and taking some old plays, but that proves to be a whole lot harder than just a top-down view.
Yeah, especially in 60 seconds as well.
Yeah, it's brutal because there's so much you want to kind of talk about, but then it's like, well, that took up 30 seconds and we haven't done anything. Very good. All right. But yeah, these last few months, weeks, I've been kind of caught up, getting ready to go to bed, grab my phone. I'm just going on YouTube, finding something to watch. Then I can kind of just zonk out to. And I get caught up on these like really quick, short tidbit League of Legends analysis on like character design. And I was like, wow, these are really cool. And like, I'm just like munching on them like junk food, just pounding them out. And I was like, wow, that's actually super interesting. And I think that kind of content or like the format of that content would do well in Overwatch, just because things are so like, you need to be quick. You need to be like really agile and just like getting your thought out there, kind of catching somebody's attention immediately, and maybe getting them to click on another video. So I tried to combine that format with like what I've been doing in Overwatch for the last couple of years, and just kind of like trying to break things down, or at least contextualizing things so that people can like appreciate it or have a better appreciation for it, I suppose. And yeah, that's kind of the gist of that. Just kind of waiting to kind of kick back up with it with the June Joust, and getting, just saving the energy for that. And yeah, just kind of waiting.
I feel like you spent about 180 seconds describing the 60-second videos. I love it.
Yeah, pretty much. It was a good couple minutes to describe, like, talk fast, say relatively intelligent things, move on. Yeah.
I'm going to take a stab at it. So you said junk food. One of my traditions in the morning has been, I'll check what came out on YouTube, the previous day. And I'm over there at the toaster, I'm working from home, and I put my toast in the toaster. And as it's heating up, I watch a 60 short, and I walk away with my toast hot and buttered, and I've just watched a video and I've learned something about Overwatch, and
Well,
it's
that
it's
works.
it's yeah, it's kind of cool because like Overwatch is so intimidating to
Mm,
analyze, and you can pull 30 facts from any given
yeah,
team fight.
genuinely.
But you pull one or two things from two or three team fights and you learn something and then you look for it in the future. So I highly endorse it. Please go
Cool.
the show notes will be in the link here. So please follow Volamel, at the very least subscribe to him on YouTube. 60-second shorts. That's all you're committing to, you know, not a long-term commitment here.
Mm.
Just short
We're the Tinder of
relationship week to week.
analysis. You know,
Yes.
we try to get in and out. You swipe right and you move on. That's it.
Pretty much. All right. So we're burying the lead here, though. So there, the on the Overwatch 2 announcement
Mm,
today, the shocking or not so shocking news, depending on whose predictions you
yeah.
read, was 5 versus 5 is the future of Overwatch. So, two questions for you on this, Volamel. The
Mm.
first is, um, what's your biggest takeaway from it? And the second is, we'll talk fantasy here in a second, fantasy implications. But let's hit the first one here. Any most salient points here for you on what this means for Overwatch, the way you view Overwatch going forward.
In a way, things are going to change. This is, I've been critical of Blizzard in the past of making these crazy like fundamental changes. And for whatever reason, call me numb to it at this point, or genuinely just kind of slightly optimistic. But I do feel positive about this change. I think there is a clear message that they're trying to send, especially with some of the changes that they've added with characters like Reinhardt and Winston, and even May to a degree. That the game is trending more towards an FPS, and I think with this new game mode and push and the way that some of the new maps are designed for said game mode, um, yeah, it feels like things are going to Overwatch 2 will feel like you have a lot more agency, or at least on the outset, that's what it looks like. Obviously, it's going to be very different when we play the game, but 5v5, it is scary. There's a lot of just takes running around. I think that anybody, and I've said this before, anybody telling you like 100% left or right, or good or bad, I think is has ulterior motives, or they're bought into something. Um, and yeah, I think I genuinely don't believe a whole lot's going to change. I think we still argue about gestures, Orisa versus his Reinhardt play. Like the main tanks in general have such a leverage, or a gap in their heroes in general, um, that is going to need to be filled. So while one of those tank players on your favorite Overwatch League team right now might not be starting in the future, I still think they'll remain on the team. I think teams. I'd be lying to you if I didn't think that things are going to kind of shrink in size. But I think capping everybody at the knees and just removing all of your tanks tomorrow, it's not going to happen even in the future. I still think, like, especially going into Overwatch 2, stuff is going to look very similar in terms of roster building, but start time is going to be a little bit different.
Yeah, for sure. I like your level-headed approach to it because there's been a lot of knee-jerk reactions
Yeah,
where it's
and
just
it's
like,
fair. I get it. It's
yeah,
somebody's job is kind of drawn into question overnight, and it's scary, and it's like, what the heck, like, why didn't we ever get to hear about this? I totally understand that. But this game needs a facelift. Something's got to change with it, and people are wondering what's going to change, and it sucks that we have to limit the game, but I really don't expect um too much to change immediately when we head into the first competitive season of Overwatch 2. I truly believe that somebody like Space and somebody like Muse will still operate very well on one given team.
yeah, for sure. I mean, you look at the number of tanks and how much better
Yeah.
the best players are on those heroes than others. It's already extremely difficult to be very
Mm-hmm.
good at Ball and at
Yep.
Reinhardt and
Yep.
at Monkey. To be good at all three of those is so impossibly hard that to then add the off tanks in that mix, it definitely makes sense that you would have more. You still need people to play those heroes at a high level
Mm.
if you want your team to be good. So you'll
Yep.
only see one of those people at a time, but it will lead to some interesting combinations. And yeah, like you said, I don't know exactly what it means, but I do think one will be able to celebrate those tanks who can play more
Yep.
heroes, kind of like you can celebrate a Fleta or a leave or a profit. Maybe you'll now have the profit of tanks because they actually can
Sure,
play all
yeah.
those heroes. In today's day, we don't have that. So, you know, I'm definitely like sad. I think about the future of tanks and the changes coming in. I have this like bit of sadness, but I get it, and it seems like an interesting future for the game.
Mm, agreed.
Well, on the fantasy aspect, then this is probably my job and not yours. But what do you think about the fantasy aspect of this? Then we play in a league together. We're in a
Mm.
season long league. Talk fantasy from time to time. But I don't know. Do you think? What do you think from a fantasy point of view on this?
I think it's definitely going to change things up. We were talking, and you kind of described it as poker. Having these hands that sometimes do well and sometimes do poorly, and it feels like it's only going to get um, more like that. I avoid using the word worse because I feel like that's kind of subjective, and if you enjoy that, then I feel like that's only going to continue to increase because if we kind of take the format and we apply it to Overwatch 2, like there could be hero pools and main tanks and off tanks kind of now fit into the same category. I guess ideally, um, and those are going to require different players, or maybe they won't. Who knows? Maybe somebody like Hydration can move in, and how does that work in terms of rules? It kind of blows things out of the water and just like super out of proportion. And then on top of that, you have to add like all of the different kind of hero changes that we're getting. Winston, I would imagine, is a tank that probably does pretty well historically in terms of, fantasy point gathering for main tanks. But now add on top of that, he has a new way to deal damage and find eliminations and find solo eliminations. So I don't know. Things are going to get a little crazy, I would guess.
Yeah, we're shaking things up, and yeah,
Mm-hmm.
we're gonna have to refigure out which tanks are good for fantasy and which ones are bad. I feel like you kind of got it going out to the back and shooting what you know about fantasy Overwatch,
Yeah.
and you're getting a new dog here. Sorry, that was a terrible analogy, but I was listening to
It
Old Yeller
works.
recently, but yeah, you've got a whole new you've got a whole new model here that you have to figure out,
Mm,
and it will be weird, it'll be complicated, but at the same time, it's like for those that
it's
play
fresh.
fantasy sports, it's not like when you're playing fantasy football or fantasy
Mm-hmm.
basketball that you have to field a roster that looks exactly like how the game is played. So there's always the option that fantasy, maybe we continue to have two tanks in fantasy and it's just different cover.
Ooh.
So we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those will be some fun future off season topics to figure out what's the most fun way to play fantasy. So
Mm-hmm.
we'll see what happens. Nice to set the context here after an interesting day of news, but
Yeah.
let's get to some specifics here. So one of the first topics we have are hero pools. I
Mm.
feel like I've listened to. I should have opened with this. You're on Tactical Crouch podcast, which not just your 60 short videos. You've been covering Overwatch. You're actually, in my opinion, the muse of Overwatch
Oh,
is
I
your
appreciate that.
official
Thank you.
title. So you're on Tactical Crouch with Yiska and with Kick Tripod, and you guys had a conversation about this, and
Mm.
Plat Chat did as well, of course. And you can quickly talk in circles about what this hero pool means. There's a lot to unpack, and there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
uncertainty. So I was curious if there's one or two points that you're most confident in going into this hero pool amidst all of the shakeups that are coming that we can't really predict.
So, I think I have three relatively salient points. I'm pretty confident in thinking that with the reduction of flanking support, that the Winston is probably going to have a hard time having any kind of dive buddies or aggressive follow up to his space creation. So I don't think that Winston or just high tempo gameplay is going to come through unless it's through Wrecking Ball, which kind of leads into my second point that with the elimination of Sombra from the meta, that kind of opens up some really ability based heroes, I suppose. And Wrecking Ball kind of still is very ability based, as much as something like Doomfist is like more iconic in that way,
Yeah.
where if you shut his mobility down or his ability usage down, he really can't do much. So that definitely opens things up. So a team like the Dallas Fuel or maybe even the London Spitfire could dependent on the map and what actually gets played, Doomfist and Wrecking Ball could actually see play. So Chengdu fans, rally around that and hopefully cross your fingers that definitely could be coming in. And then the third point, I think in general, when we see the elimination of high tempo gameplay, when we see the elimination of, again, if I'm to understand it correctly. Winston kind of falling in terms of favoritism. Sombra opening up some um, more ability based heroes. It seems like things are going to get really slow. If anything, kind of almost mimicking 2019's playoff meta. I think things are going to get very double shieldy, which kind of opens up, the old halt into rock, into Doomfist slam, into all kinds of different things. I think May's still an issue sometimes, especially when you have slow composition. So I think there's a big possibility that that comes in. There's also synergies with Roadhog as well. So I think, to kind of recap, Winston and high tempo gameplay out the window. It's probably not going to happen just because of the bans. Sombra being removed opens up a lot of ability focus heroes. And then option three, kind of tying them all together. Just, more slow tempo kind of compositions focused around double shield and, ability synergy.
Yeah, got it. I'm glad to see that we're eye to eye. That I think we'll be seeing at least a little bit of Gaga's ball.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people I think are ruling out. Oh, you can't necessarily run it as easily. Double bubble definitely seems like it's likely on the way out. But
Sure.
Gaga ball, we always got some time for that.
Oh, yeah.
It's interesting the points you bring up because, like you said at the start, you're right. Winston's good for fantasy. Orisa is not. Orisa's near the bottom of the tanks,
Sure.
as you might be able to predict. And
Mm,
so, if we're talking double shield, you'd say, well, I'm going to devalue my main tanks. But then, if main tanks are playing Roadhog, Roadhog historically, with he pumps out a lot of damage, elims, he even gets a little bit of scoring for his taking a
feeling.
breather.
Yeah.
To where I feel like teams are going to polarize, and you're going to have some teams that play a style where their main tank is very
Oh, yeah.
poor in fantasy, and others where the hog is going to be played and be more valuable. So you look at
Mm,
we don't know how things are going to work out, but of course, like gesture, super. For me,
sure.
Stand One comes to mind. Stand One played hog over Fearless in last
Mhm.
year's playoffs. He might be a little bit of a sleeper that's worth rostering, not starting the first week, but if he busts out the hog, he could be pretty valuable there. So he
Totally.
might be playing Arista as well and not be. But for me, it makes some of those main tanks more interesting. Marvel
Mm,
could get some play time next to gesture if the Sigma hog ends up being a thing as well. So those are some people I have an eye on. In some of my season long leagues, I'm picking up one or two of those, not expecting them to pop, but maybe they will.
sure.
DPSs, I feel like I don't have any read at all what DPSs are going to be popular or played. I feel like going into the season, you kind of could see that, maybe this hit scan role of Ash McCree, maybe
Mhm.
Tracer, maybe Echo, you kind of, maybe May, you kind of could sort of predict that those would be common picks. Right now, I just feel like it's a toss up. Do you have any general feel? You mentioned Doomfist. I don't think you're predicting a Doomfist meta, but it could happen.
Oh, for
Sparkle
sure.
Doomfist, Doha Genji would be a nasty dive combination in lieu of Tracer Sombra. But do you
Totally.
do you have any general feel for if there will be a common DPS composition here?
Mm, I think I this feels like a gigantic cop out, but hopefully it leads into something a little bit more crystalline. I think it will be map dependent. Haha, boring. I get it.
No,
Um,
no. I mean, it's useful.
it is true though, right? I think it'll be map dependent, and based on that, like on control maps like Village on Nepal and maybe Sanctum, I think Doomfist can kind of shine. Um, Perhaps on points like let's say like Numbani first. I don't even have the map pool open, so I'm just kind of spitballing here. Like maps or points that are a little bit more vertically inclined. I think if somebody like Chengdu comes out with a Pharah, I wouldn't necessarily be surprised. If
Hmm.
something like Genji Ash kind of comes out, I wouldn't necessarily be shocked. Maybe Super Shimada Bros with the Hanzo Genji kind of giving you still like a long range pressure threat versus the cleanup star with a strong team fight like sweeper. I think that's definitely possible.
Yeah.
Um, it kind of comes down. I feel like the crux for me really is what tanks are being played. Like Hog getting buffed definitely pushes him, even just socially, just like, hey, this guy got buffed. Let's try him in scrims. The double shield feels pretty concrete, but there again, then you have like the diva push coming in. Is that really going to affect pro play? It's really, I feel like it comes down to what tanks are played, and then that kind of also dictates or at least helps to guide what supports are being played. Like I don't know that you want to run like Orisa with Lucio all that much, especially if you don't have somebody like Ryan to be actually be your damage dealing tank.
Yeah.
So it's brawling in that way is kind of tough. So it kind of comes down for me at least to what tanks are played, and then the DPS kind of follow suit.
Gotcha. Okay. No, I think that makes sense. Play around your tanks, map dependent.
Hmm.
I throw a third element in there as far as this could be team dependent too.
Oh, totally.
Um, teams. I continue to think that teams are going to play what they're comfortable with, and if we learned anything from the first stage from Dallas's run,
Yeah.
play what you're good at, and that might just work. There might not be a single
Hmm.
meta, and I could be wrong on that, but I feel like
Oh,
you
I
mentioned,
think you're spot on. I think
yeah,
when you look at Chengdu historically, haha, funny meme. They play the funny heroes, but they've made play-ins. They've made actual stabs at good teams. They've punched above their weight. You look at Dallas. You look at Toronto. I feel like last season. I feel like you look at the Mayhem historically. I mean, I've
yeah,
kind of been on the soapbox for a little bit on my podcast, but I think Kuki in general is kind of slept on as a coach. I think he's somebody that can identify a meta very quickly, but adds his own touch on things. When you look at last season, early on with like the Brig kind of pocketing the McCree and allowing BQB to run these wide flanks, and now with Gargoyle on Sigma kind of challenging the diva role, I think it's important to have these little stylistic changes, and we're starting to see that more and more, and I don't think that's going to stop, especially in hero pools.
yeah, yeah. I think that's fair. It'll be interesting. Hero pools to me seem like it might reduce the number of comps played, and that you would get to one
Hmm.
comp faster. But it could just be where balance is at. So I'll be keeping an eye out. I'm glad to hear that. Just like me, you don't really know, and maybe that's actually the correct answer. The correct answer can be we don't know, and it depends. So
Yeah.
I like to see it, but I'm excited to see how things develop.
Mm.
And talking about being excited about how things develop, I was very excited about some of the rookie players on New York and Guangzhou, but so far both of those teams have been a little bit a little bit of a wet fart of a season
Yeah, that's a
so
good way to put
far.
it.
Not that anyone was necessarily expecting them to be one of the best teams in the league. If you
Mm.
bought into Scrimbucks, you definitely thought New York could challenge some of those upper tier teams. But at the same time, both of these teams have just disappointing. They haven't felt good to watch.
Mm.
And whether they were winning or losing, the matches just weren't pretty. So for me, I'm not over here saying, do we think the Titans can turn it around? Do we think the Valiant can turn it around? But I feel like
Right.
both of these teams have done horribly in fantasy just because they've been having a lot of like O3s.
Hmm.
And it's led to short matches, full holds that don't lend themselves to rich games with a lot of numbers and stats. Do you think either one of those teams could turn it around, and why?
So specifically for the Valiant and the Titans.
Oh heck no, for the Charge and for the Excelsior.
Okay. Um, yeah, I think the Charge, they're a conundrum in and of themselves. I think if either one of those teams, if New York kind of turns it around, I wouldn't necessarily be shocked. I think they had such a just deflated and empty performance that it didn't feel like they really ever showed up. So I'm waiting for them to kind of like wake up a little bit in that way, and actually see what this team has shown in practice to get everybody kind of all riled up and excited for them. But the Charge in general, it feels like, I mean, I don't even know publicly if there's even a head coach signed to this team at this point. Now that
Yeah.
Arachne's left and Damon has parted ways with the team, that they don't have a strong hit scan. Mike Haley has been hit or miss. Feels generous, to be completely honest. I think his positioning is baffling at times. I remember saying this in the wee hours of the morning, staying up for the Asian games, and I'm just like, I feel like there were these like great generals like millennia ago that figured out that like high ground was important, but somehow Mike Haley on Ash he just is allergic to it. He just doesn't like being on the high ground. He'd much rather sit on the low ground with his little pump action rifle on Ash and do nothing. His positioning's bizarre. Their rotations are just as bizarre, it feels like. And it's a roster that you see some of these names. I'm a Rio apologist. I think he's a workhorse. You look at Choi Se-wan. I'm kind of dubbing as the new captain of the Red Lantern. Shout out to anybody who understands that reference. And you have Eileen Krong. Like, these are great players. Kareev, I think, is still playing quite well for himself, even though I think his decision making is still bizarre. Um, yeah, this is a team that like should be performing at least competently, but they're all over the place. Like they are, if either the New York Excelsior, if you had to ask me if New York or Charge actually gets it together, I'm more open to the idea that New York actually figures something out or finds a way to kind of transmute what's happening in practice to actually bringing that to the stage. Charge kind of feels like a lost cause. Like this new coach has to really kind of reinvigorate things for this team because boy howdy are they rough.
Yeah, it's painful because I was excited about Kaylee. You know, you
Mm-hmm.
would see the clips and you're like, this guy is cracked, but you you know a relatively new rookie on the scene,
Mm.
very similar to, I'm going to draw a comparison here to Guangbong.
Okay.
And I actually think that this is a different conversation that I don't want to get into, but I think there's also
Sure.
some Pine comparisons to be had
Okay.
as well. I put them in a category of players maybe not the most experienced but with insane potential.
Mm.
And I think in the right meta, each of these players could be amazing. But we were in the middle of a very complex meta.
Sure.
And you're seeing players like Hotba and Toby come in who arguably could be washed. I'm not going to say they're washed, but that's kind of the argument. But they also have a lot of experience across a lot of different
Mm-hmm.
metas. And Guangbong, Kaylee, they definitely don't. And I feel like this particular meta is throwing a lot out there. So my theory for this meta was, a lot of experience, a lot of competitive experience was really important to being successful, more so than the raw mechanics, which,
Mm.
you could probably say of any meta, but I think more so in this one. And
That's fair.
we saw Eileen uh, on the hit scan roll, which we've not necessarily seen a lot of in the past. And I feel like that was like the emergency plug of, you
Yep.
know, things are not going well, and this is our only option left. And even you mentioned coaching as well. Choi Sawan has been fantastic, has a
Yeah.
fantastic tracer, but it's like he can do so much else, and Eileen can also play the tracer. So
Mm-hmm.
I feel like they're pigeonholing themselves a little bit into trying to be slaves to the meta rather than necessarily doing what they think they could be good at. Because I feel like with Choi Sawan and Eileen, they're both such good players. You could do
You could
something
do,
that will
yeah,
work.
totally something weird and it's strictly your own. I would guess for this team in particular, they probably started kind of not with the social experiment of scrims where it's just like, this is where everybody's thinking, okay, let's start here. And then they were already kind of maybe underperforming in scrims and felt like they needed to catch up before they could learn to break the rules, if that makes sense. I feel like that's pretty common. Before teams are just like, all right, this is going to be our weird and wild look for how things go, and that's again, hopefully we can get something from hero pools, and hopefully that's the comfortability or leniency on comfort that we learn from hero pools. I like to hope that teams take all of the changes that Blizzard throws at this game and use them as learning tools. So hopefully that's what comes from it.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah,
Overwatch seems to favor the agile startups.
yeah,
Me being stuck in corporate America, I'm like DevOps and sprints. Whereas, the lumbering corporate giants that are slow to adapt are going to get
hmm,
left in the dust pretty quick here. I'm stuck on New York. I think I'm with you that I could see a world in which they turn around. They might be having the same problem with Guangbong that the
sure,
Charger having with Kaylee, but thankfully they had 4 DPS. Flora, to me, on hit scan has been a discovery. I never absolutely
mm,
loved his hit scan previously. I loved his Sombra. Um, but seeing him this good on hit scan at the owl level is a surprise to me. But they're still struggling so much with other competent DPS players,
yeah,
and it just makes me wonder. They seem to be less far away from turning things around. I can't quite put my
mm,
finger on why things aren't working, but it seems like they're closer.
I would say so. I don't even know if I'd agree that they're close, but they have so like the opinion from them in practice versus what I saw on the server is so like divorced from each other that I'm like, okay, this team has not like come alive yet, so I'll give you the benefit of the doubt that maybe something happened that you just did not like, you did not perform or you didn't get what was happening in terms of like strategic development with the meta. So maybe you just fell behind and we can just get you, in June Joust. And that's when you're going to pop off. And that's when those scrim bucks are going to get cashed in. It's possible. They have good players. They have a talented team. I think Yakpun has still, for whatever reason, underperformed, but you just still have people like Jonak. I mean, Feathers looks great. Ivy historically has just been fantastic. So this is a team that again should do well, but that performance is so divorced from what we're hearing about in practice that I'm willing to give more benefit there.
Yeah, yeah. All right, I've got two last quick lightning round questions
Sure.
here for you. So, do you have any favorite players that you think are performing very well despite being on lower performing teams that, people might not have realized yet?
Shout out to Bebe. Again, I'm a Bebe apologist. Shout out to anybody who liked X6 gaming from years ago. I'm a big X6 supporter. And yeah, I think Bebe's definitely been performing well. I wouldn't say Justice is a bad team, but again, somebody who I think has been surprising some people who may have doubted him in the past. But to kind of really my true answer to the question, kind of giving Bebe the honorable mention and nod. I think it's been Khan on Paris
Mm,
Eternal. I think he's been an absolute stud coming into flex support. I think his Baptiste is at nutty, and hearing things from some of the commentators in tier two that kind of covered him for a while. I'm expecting very, very, very good things, and I think with the addition of Dredro, that Paris Eternal probably has an argument for a top Western, if not the best Western support line right now. I think Khan's has to be in consideration at least right now for rookie of the year. I think he's performing extremely well.
can I call you out on that and say who's the better player? Do you think Khan or Crimzo's the better player?
Oh, I kind of like Crimzo.
Crimzo's been great this year, but you got to
Yeah,
think about it a little bit, right? You got to think about it.
I do have to think about it. I think I need to see personally. I need to see Khan on a few more different picks. It sucks. It's kind of unfair to compare him to Crimzo just because I've seen him for so long.
Yeah, yeah.
I saw him on Fuel, and that team was just a dumpster fire, and he still performed well. And I could see I could see a lot there that I liked. It just sucks because I haven't seen that same depth from Khan just yet. I don't doubt that he can perform at least immediately up to the standard that somebody like Crimzo or another kind of world class Western flex support can. So yeah, I guess I'll have to say Crimzo there.
All right, all right. Good gauge though. I love the Bebe call out as well.
Mm.
I have been I've been transposing his cute smiling face over Prince and calling him Purple Rain for all of the nades that he's throwing out.
Mm.
So I'm trying to get. I'm
Well
always
done.
looking for terrible nicknames for players, and I'm calling Bebe Purple Rain right now.
That works.
All right, last question for you.
Sure.
On Tactical Crouch,
Mm.
you previously, or I should say, host John Kick Tripod was asking who was the MVP of the May Melee, and I feel like the common answer to that is Fearless, which I
Mm.
am totally fine with. But when you were quickly answering that question, you mentioned Doha,
Mm.
and to go full circle with this, Doha was very much overlooked for fantasy this year because people kind of figured this is the Sparkle Eggsy show
Yep.
and he was easy to acquire. And he has been one of the top, I believe, six DPS in fantasy so far.
Oh wow.
You deem him the MVP. What do you think of Doha, and is what he's doing sustainable with Pine on the roster?
That definitely throws a wrench into things for him in particular, just because of how explosive both Pine and Sparkle can be, and I think they kind of, in a weird way, almost make space for each other just with how they have played historically. Sparkle's probably one of his biggest downfalls is that sometimes he can get caught out, and he kind of can play a little too aggressive, even going all the way back to goats. Like his Zarya, it's just sometimes he just runs it in and just kind of just gets picked sometimes. Similar to Pine, like just very mechanically gifted players, very aggressive players. So
Yeah.
Doha going forward, it is going to be tough for him to kind of have a word in edgewise. But for the May Melee in particular, I was just taken aback. And I did, to kind of loop full circle. I did a 60 short on his swap on Kings Row versus Shanghai. I believe it was in the finals. Um, where Shanghai comes out with a minute left on Kings Row third with Orisa. They swap to Orisa knowing they don't have, Primal Rage anymore. And Doha, makes the audible, goes back, swaps Hanzo. And like that to me is like peak Overwatch where you're abusing the fact of where the objective's positioned, the ability that you can use to swap heroes, like the that to me is like the core of what Overwatch is supposed to be. It's using everything at your disposal. It's using the entire map. It's using The geometry. It's being adaptable and flexible with your strategies and having this wide open hero pool that we know that Doha has and that he showed literally through that final. So yeah, I'm somebody who's been a big stickler about flexibility through just my content creation and writing career. I think Doha showed that, and I thought he really kind of put on a master class of just how to play Overwatch. So yeah, I would I gave him the nod. I think again, I agree. Fearless, I thought had a beautiful story. I think he played lights out. I think he played out of his mind, frankly, and has been. So yeah, I don't think you could have missed picking a story or a person on the Dallas Fuel, but my person would have been Doha. Yeah,
Yeah, it's good to hear. I'm over here crossing my fingers that we see Doha Genji in the June Joust next to
that's
Sparkle's Doomfist.
tough.
I'm really hoping for it. But
Maybe, who
no,
knows?
I actually I agree with everything you said except for one thing. And I've got to
Okay.
give my fantasy take on Pine.
Ah,
I'm excited about Pine,
okay.
but not for fantasy and not for the fuel. I feel like this was a really good move for the fuel, and it is them confirming that
Mm,
they are okay with only 2 DPS because they would be fine. I think this is them saying they're fine not getting anything out of Pine, but Pine gives them a possible peak in particular metas, and if he's,
for sure.
playing on all cylinders, that they might not otherwise have had. I
Mm,
feel like we're not going to see Pine play a whole lot. But if the fuel had picked up some of these other names that were being talked about, like Glister,
okay.
like Edison, then we
Hmm.
would see true swaps regularly happening. This to me is like when you bring in the it's not a fair comparison, but I play a lot of fantasy football. It's like
Ah,
when you bring in um Frank Gore onto your team, a really old running back who he might play here and there, but he's not being brought in to be the primary guy or even the
gotcha.
secondary guy. This is them saying we have a pecking order of Sparkle and Doha. And Pine, you're still on the roster and we'd love to have you, but we also want some fans and we want you to come in and make some spectacular plays from
Right.
time to time. But you're not rotating in every week. You're not
Mm,
rotating in every match. So I actually see this as very good for Doha's fantasy value
okay.
compared to what could have happened. So I'm going to make that call right now. Could be right or wrong, but I'm confident in
Makes
this one.
sense.
All right. Well, that about rounds things out. If you are not already following Volamel on YouTube and Twitter, his links are in the show notes. You better follow him. Fantastic content all around. Volamel, any final words before we part for the day?
Be kind to your fellow man and or woman and or person, and yeah, get excited for Overwatch 2, I guess.
Yeah, excited for Overwatch 2, excited for a 5v5, and I agree. Let's all be nice to each other as we're getting back out into the world. If you're in a
Yeah.
location where it is safe to do so, I
Mm,
feel for my coworkers and friends in Brazil and India. Just be mindful that just because numbers may be low where you are, it's not like that everywhere. Just being mindful, be
true.
kind, and think about those globally. Which nice message from Overwatch, nice
Yeah.
message from Volamel to round things out. Thanks for coming on today. Great having you on.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the chat. It's always fun.